Gay marriage, an American right? Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. Let me start with this. Today, the United States Supreme Court said it would take up the issue of same-sex marriage. This is an astounding moment in American history and in the march of rights that began in Philadelphia in the last quarter of the 18th century and continues through this first quarter of the 21st. Is it constitutional for a state to deny people of the same sex the right to marry under the law? Well, let's consider the 14th Amendment. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the laws. And here's Justice Kennedy, Anthony Kennedy, in his majority opinion in the Lawrence case of 2003, which declared anti-sodomy laws unconstitutional. Quote, does a statute making it a crime for two persons of the same sex to engage in certain intimate sexual conduct violate the Due Process Clause? Yes. A statute making it a crime for two persons of the same sex to engage in certain intimate sexual conduct violates the due process law. Quote, liberty protects the person from unwarranted government intrusions. Freedom extends beyond spatial bounds. Liberty presumes an autonomy of self that includes freedom of thought, belief, expression, and certain intimate conduct. The defendants are adults, and their conduct was in private and consensual. And, quote, to declare the issue as one related to the right to engage in certain sexual conduct demeans the claim the individual put forward. So could it happen? Could it happen next year that the Supreme Court declares it unconstitutional to deny people of the same sex the right to marry? What a question. What a story. Joining me now is the president of the Human Rights Campaign, Chad Griffin, and gay rights advocate Elizabeth Birch. Chad, I hope I set up as best I could. I can't write the majority opinion next year, but I think I know what it should look like. Your thoughts?
I couldn't have said it better, Chris. It really is an incredible day today that the Supreme Court is taking the Prop 8 case, the Perry case, as well as the DOMA case. And, you know, look, when this case was filed almost 4 years ago, the Prop 8 case, we made the case in court. Ted Olson and David Boies made the case in court that in this country we don't deny our citizens a fundamental right. And the Supreme Court has called marriage a fundamental right no less than 14 times in the history of this country. And I'm optimistic that once the court does hear this case and the DOMA case, that they're going to come down on the side of freedom, liberty, and equality, just as they have so many times in our nation's past.
And equal protection of the laws as well. Elizabeth, thank you for coming on. We haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, equal protection of the laws, liberty. Liberty's a pretty profound notion in this country.
It is.
Pursuit of happiness is in our Declaration.
Right.
Why not?
Well, here's the thing. If you are gay and alive in our time in America, we're living in a kind of a policy and civil rights renaissance. We have seen extraordinary leadership from other parts of government already. Don't we judge, Chris, presidents by whether they stand up to the moment of history in which they live? We've seen President Obama step up to this issue, gay marriage, like
getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, now saying he won't enforce DOMA.
And our military has even stepped up.
Right.
So now we got
even the Marines are doing a great job of
implementing. Even the Marines
right.
are. And now we got to see, will the Supreme Court also keep pace in our time with the other major institutions?
Count me as an optimist here, and I know there were questions. Chad, you're the expert at head of HRC, and I've supported it. My wife has for years. HRC, the Human Rights Campaign. By the way, you've got a hell of a great name, the Human Rights Campaign. It's just a great name. The Liberty Clause. If you just get to the idea of the 14th Amendment, the right to liberty, life, liberty, and property cannot be denied you except through due process law. You got to break a law to lose your liberty. You have to do something wrong. It's got to be a crime you're guilty of. You can't just be denied liberty. Your thoughts on that issue and how that can be used in the Constitution?
That's exactly right. And there is no state interest to deny our citizens and the plaintiffs in this case, the fundamental right to marriage. You know, Chris, oftentimes we get lost a bit when we're talking about these things, talking about the politics and the law. But at the end of the day, there are fundamental lives at stake. You know, when we filed this case, Chris and Sandy and Jeff and Paul had been together for 10 years. Now they've been together for almost 13 years. And Chris and Sandy's twin boys were just entering high school. When this case is heard, they'll be getting ready to graduate from high school. Their moms deserve the same freedom to marry, just as everyone else has in this country. And in this country, we don't deny a certain portion of our citizens a fundamental right. We just don't. It's not American.
Isn't it true that when we had this in the court, in the ninth, in the appellate level, nobody came forward because nobody could come up with what you call a justification, some compelling reason? Just chat on that point. You raised it. There's no compelling reason against giving the rights to people, the right to marriage.
That's exactly right, Chris. It's important to note in both of these cases, the United States government has refused to defend DOMA, the federal law that's now before this court. And when we filed the case right here in California, as one has to do, we sued the governor at the time, which was Arnold Schwarzenegger, and our attorney general at the time, which was Jerry Brown, the current governor. Both responded by refusing to defend the case and ultimately joined our side in the case and said that it was fundamentally an unconstitutional law and they weren't going to defend it. So the judge in our case, Chief Judge Von Walker, who wrote that historic ruling in this case, allowed the intervening defendants, the proponents of Prop 8, to intervene and to defend the case. And when on the DOMA case, a small group of folks on Capitol Hill out of the House have come together and are defending it because the federal government won't. At the end of the day, this is unconstitutional and everyone knows it.
Well, it's a day in history here. As we said, this could be a major moment in the court's history. Look at what Tom Goldstein of SCOTUS blog, this is a very respected blog, wrote last week. Quote, I have never before seen cases that I believe would be discussed 200 years from now. Bush v. Gore and Obamacare were relative pipsqueaks. The government's assertion of the power to prohibit a loving couple to marry or to refuse to recognize such a marriage is profound. So is the opposite claim that 5 justices can read the federal Constitution to strip the people of the power to enact the laws governing such a fundamental social institution. You know, Elizabeth, it's not like we're talking about rock of age, the big surprise, because look at this. We've got 9 states that have done it. And this past election, I think, is very pivotal. 4 states did it completely by popular vote.
For the
no
first
court
time.
ruling on rights, just public will.
For the first time in 40 years in 4 states, thanks to the efforts of Chad and a lot of other people, for the first time there was a populist vote and the people spoke. They have never spoken in favor before. But there are really 2 ways. It's also equal protection under the law, and also that the court has found it to be a fundamental right. This is an extraordinary, extraordinary time. And
let's cut this in 2.
Right.
There's 2 questions here. One is DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. This administration will not defend it in the courts. If that gets struck down, what does that say to cases around the country where people have been allowed to marry in the same gender? Chat on that. What happens if DOMA gets struck down by the court 5-4, whatever?
Yeah, the ridiculously named Defensive Marriage Act would be gone, obviously.
Well, what would it mean to a gay person who's married?
That would mean that couples who are married in those states, as well as the District of Columbia, their marriages would be recognized by the federal government. Now, it would mean we still have a lot of work to do, and depending upon how they rule in the Prop 8 case, we would still need other states to move forward with the right to marry.
Right.
But
you'd have Social Security if you were in California, for example. The appellate court is still upholding that Prop 8, or holding it down or overruling it. If you're in a state, for example, Iowa, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maryland, D.C., Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Iowa, Washington State, if you're in one of those states and you're married legally, that means you can have Social Security coverage, right?
That's right. Your marriage would be treated.
If DOMA goes down.
But you wouldn't have it if you're in Alabama. So what happens if DOMA gets struck down? Really, you're back to circa 1996. What DOMA says is 2 things. One state does not have to recognize the marriage law, same-sex marriage law of another state. That would be struck down, and then there would have to be another test as to full faith and credit.
But you realize what that would mean if you move from California to Utah, and you're getting the recognized marriage in California, but not in Utah.
Yeah.
But in Utah, living in Salt Lake City, you'd be able to get Social Security benefits and all the federal stuff.
You would. It's not clear.
It would depend on how the court rules in that case, Chris.
They may, if the court reaches the question of full faith and credit, that is, Utah must recognize the marriage laws of California. Then yes, it's possible.
But you'd still be getting your Social Security checks, though, wouldn't you?
No, it's not clear.
It's not clear. Okay, let's go back to a clear case. If Prop 8, if the decision by the ninth, if the decision to overrule that, to strike that down, if that is upheld, where do we stand then? What does that do? Just is equality then the law of the land? Is marriage equality then the law of the land?
Again, it would depend upon how the Supreme Court rules in that case. If they uphold the ruling as it currently is by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, it would mean that it would immediately affect California and marriages would begin again here in the state. and it would prevent any other state from granting a right and then revoking that right, as California did. But look, this court can also go back and to Chief Judge Von Walker's ruling, which was a broad and sweeping victory that looked at equal protection, and it was in the realm of Loving v. Virginia and Brown v. Board. But, Chris, when you talk about DOMA and the impact of it, you don't have to look further than the plaintiff in that case, Edie Windsor. You know, the ACLU brought that case with Edie Windsor, and Edie had been married to her wife for 20 years, got married in Canada, moved to New York, and unfortunately, her wife passed away. And you know what the government did when her wife passed away? They sent her a tax bill for $300,000. They wouldn't do that to you and your wonderful wife, Chris, and they wouldn't do that to other straight couples in this country. It's not fair.
Okay, let's go to something. Let's get really revolutionary now. We only have a few minutes. And the wonder of the Supreme Court. I'm always in wonder looking at Justice Kennedy. Yeah. Maybe because he's Irish. I don't know. I'm just kidding. There's something about him I find very interesting. I also find Roberts interesting, too. Yeah. He's from California. Yeah. If you look at the majority opinion in the case involving Lawrence, Texas, which was about outlawing or basically declaring anti-sodomy laws unconstitutional, he says not only in that court decision that you can't deny a person's liberty in these cases to engage in intimate conduct, but it's about something bigger. Marriage is not about having constant sex. It's about having loving relationships. It's about people. Right. Not organs. It's about people. Now, let me get this. I want to get really big on this. It's about family. Okay, well, you tell it your way. But if it gets down to questions of liberty and equal protection of the law, these fundamental things they developed in Philadelphia in the old days, back in the 18th century, those values, it seemed to me, argue very clearly for the right to choose your partner in marriage. Clearly. Now, your thoughts on that, Chad? I think it's to me, a stirringly fundamental issue we're at here. It's not about sexual mores. It's not about values about sexual conduct. It's about the fundamental right of a person to pursue happiness and define liberty their way and define relationships their way. They come to them basically because of who they are. They don't choose to be gay or whatever.
In fact,
your
Chris,
thoughts?
You're absolutely right. In fact, that's the only thing it's about. It's actually the most simple of things that we could be talking about. In this country, we deny a portion of our population the fundamental right to marry the person they love because of who they are, how we are born. Again, it's un-American, and I believe that...
Tell that to Trent Lott. Tell that to these guys who think we have a certain age where we choose and all this stuff.
We've learned over the last few years we don't write off anyone. I mean, you look at Ted Olson and so many Republicans and Democrats who've stood up with us on this.
Well, Joe is a great president. You look like a great president right now, Chad. Thank you. Joe Salmis is a great president for years, and my friend.
Indeed.
And you too, sir. Thank you. It's an honor to have you on and your organization. Elizabeth Burtz, it's good to have you back. By the way, we're seeing a much bigger studio now. Coming up, the Republican civil... It's going to be a big hit. We'll be covering this all year. By the Republican establishment's at war with its crazy wing. They said they lost the election because ideologues pulled Mitt Romney too far to the right. That sounds reasonable. Wrong, say the right wing. We lost because Mitt Romney wasn't right-wing enough. Well, the winner of this little tango will determine whether the GOP moves to the center, where it might find some votes, or becomes an even more fringy party. Also, fiscal cliff tonight. It's down now to just two people. Everybody seems to have agreed. Two people get in the room, the president and the leader of the opposition, John Boehner, the speaker. Should be interesting. They may be closer, some argue, to an agreement than we think. And then the question is, can they sell the deal to their bases, to their fringies? Left and right, I must say. Plus, Republicans say they would change after the election, and they are. Guess what? They're changing the rules, or at least some of them are proposing to Republicans in Pennsylvania and 3 other states. Obama won. They're trying to eliminate the winner-take-all system of awarding electoral votes. Why not? That way, Republicans could win electoral votes in states they lose. That's a good deal. And New Jersey Governor Chris Christie finally meets his idol, New Jersey's most famous resident, the man he's seen in concert more than 100 times, the governor and the boss, Bruce Springsteen, coming up in a sideshow. They're friends now. This is Hardball, a place for politics.